actually doesn't matter technically what foods you're eating. However, so these are the people who just think they can just keep eating as much as they want and they don't gain weight. Something's off limits. We're just going to want it more. But if you are doing it because you think that it is the key to fat loss and it is the only way forwards, it is not. My goal weight was 140 pounds. I won't lie, it does feel nice to have abs, but I did not feel like my abs were that good at the time. Welcome to the Unfiltered Athlete, the show where we get real and honest about training, nutrition, performance, and mindset. I'm Georgia Radley, nutritionist, athlete, coach, and now the host of the Unfiltered Athlete podcast. I'm here to help you fuel smarter, train harder, and actually enjoy the process. Join me as I share practical advice, science-backed strategies, and all the things I learned and got wrong along my journey from starting the gym as a complete beginner to competing internationally in 2 different sports. I'm so excited to be recording this first episode. It's something that's been on my mind for a while. I've been wanting to find a way to share information in more depth with more context, more nuance, because I'm a yapper at heart, and I think there are so many 60-second sound bites on TikToks and Reels and quick read carousels out there, which can be great, but I want to be able to go deeper with you. I want to be able to go beyond surface level. I want to share practical advice and personal stories on a range of topics, from nutrition to training to mindset to just life, but also how they all relate to each other, because none of those areas exist in a vacuum. We are human and they all link up together. So in this first episode, I'm going to kick off with breaking down some of the biggest misconceptions around getting lean and losing fat. I'm talking about the tips and tricks out there that are just plain BS, but also the traps that we fall into psychologically with all this messaging about weight loss and dieting and what we should look like that are not only unhelpful and not conducive to long-term fat loss, but also they can be really harmful. So if you're listening right now, whether you are wanting to lose a lot of weight, whether you are just trying to shift a few pounds, or you want to see some muscle definition without sacrificing your health or performance, this episode is for you. And this is not a weight loss podcast, but I did want to start with this episode because as someone who actually started going to the gym at a point in my life where I was quite overweight and I wanted to tone up, as they say at the time, and as I would also say at the time, I wanted to change my body composition, and there was just so much misinformation. I just felt very confused about what I was supposed to be doing, and I was trying to follow lots of different conflicting pieces of advice, and this was 10 years ago, but that misinformation is still going very strong. And so I've narrowed it down today to, if I could choose just 6 myths or pieces of misinformation that I wish I had known back then, that I feel like would have saved me a lot of frustration, a lot of heartache, a lot of feeling like I'd failed a lot of the time, and allowed me to progress faster. These would be those 6 things that I choose. So without further ado, let's dive into the first one. Fat loss myth number 1 is that you need to eat clean or cut out your favorite foods to lose fat. And I think this one is everywhere, whether it's hashtag clean eating, whether it's 30-day challenges, or just people demonizing specific foods or food groups, whether it's bread one week or cereal or sugar, and then another time it's fat, and sometimes it's seed oils. But the message is always around, to get lean, you need to be perfect with food. And I say perfect in inverted commas, and only eat, quote, good foods. And I think that also comes with a bit of like a moral high ground, eating farm-raised foods and grass-fed and organic. And I mean, if you can afford that, if you have access to it, amazing, go for it. But I also think it can be harmful to spread this idea that in order to get results and even be healthy, that we have to follow some kind of perfection. Because the truth is, eating well can be expensive. It doesn't need to be super expensive, but unfortunately it can be. And so adding more complexity, adding more rules around it is not going to be helpful for most people. So the idea that eating clean, and whether that is in this organic sense or whether it is just in the sense of not eating processed or ultra processed foods to be able to lose fat, that just is not the case. And to understand why, I'm just going to explain actually how fat loss works. So for the most part, the most effective way to lose fat is through a calorie deficit. And that means your body is consuming less energy than it is using or expending. And a calorie is a unit of energy. So a calorie deficit means that you are consuming fewer calories, that's units of energy, than you are using on a daily basis. So that's your calories burned. Bearing in mind that your calories burned is going to be a combination of what your body burns at rest without doing anything, plus any additional activity activity that you might do. So that is a calorie deficit. And what happens when we're in a calorie deficit, especially when we are active and strength training and eating plenty of protein, is that because we are in that energy deficit, our body uses fat for energy, and that is how fat loss happens. There are other ways that fat loss can occur, which I'll come on to later in this episode, but that is the most effective, the main route to fat loss, so a calorie deficit. And so if we consider that what is required for fat loss is primarily a calorie deficit, it actually doesn't matter technically what foods you're eating. If you are eating fewer calories than you are expending, you can lose fat. However, that is not a free pass to just eat whatever you want, nor will it be the most effective and obviously not the most healthy way to lose fat. So there is nuance to this calorie deficit. Whilst the principle of energy balance is fixed, the actual processes that are going on in your body that dictate your energy intake and energy expenditure are variable because your body is not a robotic machine. There's a lot of fluctuation going on, and each individual will process foods differently and respond differently. So as an example, foods that are high in fiber and less processed, so things like whole grains, things like fruits and vegetables, they might have the same number of calories and carbohydrates as a more processed version of the food, but actually because you have to work harder to digest them, and because some of it does not get fully digested because it's got high fiber, if you imagine like eating sweet corn and that comes out not fully processed the other end, that's an example of food where even if on paper it has the same number of calories as an ultra processed food, the calorie intake from that food might not be as high. So that's just one example of nuance when it comes to calorie deficits. Another thing is the thermic effect of food, and this can also tie into high fiber foods, but the biggest example is protein. So in terms of digesting food, your body needs to use energy to digest foods, whether it's moving it through your digestive system, absorbing it, even just chewing it. There's lots of processes that your body actually uses energy just to be able to eat and digest. And out of all the foods, protein is the one your body needs to burn the most calories to digest. So the thermic effect of food is what that's called. And then we've got differences in individual digestion and metabolism. So obviously some people will just seem to burn more calories than others at rest and during exercise. We've got some people who food will move through them faster, and when it moves through faster, it might not have had as much time to digest, so they might not have absorbed as much of the nutrients and therefore not as many calories from it. And then we also have this idea of adaptive thermogenesis. So I'm going to keep this brief for today because I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but everyone has an individual capacity to, their metabolism will adapt. So when you eat more calories, for some people, they will burn off more energy as heat. So these are the people who you just think they can just keep eating as much as they want and they don't gain weight. A lot of that comes down to a genetic ability for their body to adapt, and the reverse can also be true. So a calorie deficit works for weight loss and ideally fat loss under the right conditions, but it's not quite as simple as calories in versus calories out, because there are things that can actually affect how many calories we burn and how many calories we actually get from our food. In addition, just because this stands true does not mean that eating all ultra processed foods is a good idea, because less processed foods tend to be more nutrient dense. So they contain more micronutrients, more vitamins and minerals. They are foods that make us healthier, and they also help us have stable blood sugar, higher energy levels, and more importantly, for a calorie deficit specifically, when you are eating less than your body is burning, they are more filling. So if you are thinking, well, all I need is a calorie deficit, so I'm just going to eat whatever I want as long as I stay within my calories, and you are going for just highly processed foods, then you are very likely to feel hungry, because, for example, 2,000 calories from junk food is not going to fill you up as much as 2,000 calories from nutrient-dense, minimally processed foods, protein, fruits and veg, things like that. If you are always hungry, you're less likely to stick to your deficit. But the flip side of that is that if you are trying to completely cut out foods and remove any trace of anything, enjoyable sweet treats, then you're also less likely to stick to it. Because if you feel restricted, if you feel like you can't have things, psychologically, that puts you in a position where you're going to want that food more. So what I'm getting at here is not, yes, you can eat whatever you want, and it's also not, no, you have to cut out all processed foods. It's finding a balance that works for you. Yes, you can eat chocolate, you can eat bread, you can eat rice, you can eat cheese, all those things that you might have been told are bad for fat loss. But it's not a free-for-all. We just need to be aware that being overly restrictive is not a long-term strategy, because these foods that you might be trying to cut out are going to appear. They exist. They're going to appear in your life again and again. So you're better off learning how to integrate them now rather than try to cut them out, because are you going to stick to that for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years? etc. Do you want to lose fat and lose weight right now for a few months, or do you want to lose it and keep it off and stay healthy long term without feeling like you're constantly having to dip in and out of diets? And that is why finding balance is the strategy that I promote, that I encourage. So if I give an example of what I've been doing with a client recently, she's been planning out her food, tracking calories, and what we're doing is actually she's deliberately leaving about 100 to 200 calories left at the end of the day that she hasn't necessarily tracked in advance. And she's leaving these calories for a sweet treat of choice in the evening because she knows that this is when her cravings tend to hit. And she's actually starting to really enjoy this process because she then doesn't feel like she's being bad because that guilt comes in, and then that can lead to sort of self-sabotaging behaviors. And then she feels more in control around food throughout the day because she doesn't feel like foods are off limits, because that idea of the forbidden fruit effect, if something's off limits, we're just going to want it more. But at the same time, she's not trying to see how many sweet treats and processed foods she can fit within her macros. She is trying to prioritize and plan her main meals and snacks around minimally processed foods like lean proteins, fruit, vegetables, whole grains, things that make her feel good inside and out, but also she's leaving room for other sweet treats that she really enjoys. I say sweet treats, it doesn't need to be sweet treats. Some people love a bag of crisps. That could be your treat. That's absolutely fine. But I'm talking kind of in general about more processed foods and the foods that are most commonly deemed as unhealthy. And this isn't me saying eat more of them. If you are perfectly fine going without, that is brilliant, good for you. But the majority of people are not. And the majority of people have a huge difficulty cutting them out long term and end up bouncing back, rebounding, and fluctuating constantly between feeling out of control and then trying to feel really in control. And what we're looking for is to get balance. So in summary, you don't need to eat clean to lose fat. In theory, you can lose fat eating any foods, but basing your meals and snacks around more nutritious, more filling foods is going to help you feel better, it's going to help you stay full, and it's going to support muscle maintenance and growth, which is also going to support your fat loss and ensuring that if you're in a calorie deficit and losing weight, that you are retaining your muscle and the weight that you're losing is mostly coming from fat. So fat loss myth number 2 is that you can spot reduce, aka decide where you lose fat from. And this most commonly happens when someone asks me, how can I lose belly fat? And it can be a really tricky one because I don't want to discourage you. I'm not saying you can't lose your belly fat. But the issue is when we set an unrealistic expectation of being able to choose where we lose fat from, then we undermine and diminish progress that we actually are making. We're just not focusing on it. So if I take a before and after picture, so to speak, and all I'm looking at in the mirror is what's happening to my stomach, what's going on my belly, are my abs more visible? If I zone in on that one area, I might have made loads of progress. I might have lost fat on my arms, I might have lost fat on my legs, around my neck, around my face, and on my back. But if I'm only looking at my stomach and I happen to have genetics that mean that that's the last place for fat to leave, then I'm going to be looking at those pictures and saying, I've made no progress. And when that happens, you lose motivation and you're more likely to give up, even though you're doing so well. The reality is that you cannot choose where you lose fat from, but you can lose overall body fat. Your body and your genetics will dictate where you lose fat from first. So for me personally, if I start to lose weight, if I start to lose fat, the first place my body likes to take it from is my shoulders and my upper back. So I can have like striations in my traps and in my delts, but still no six pack. Whereas other people will literally have six pack abs, but their backs won't be lean at all. So part of it is that we need to accept our individual genetics. That applies not just to spot reducing fat, but overall for being healthy and happy in our bodies and having an overall healthy relationship with our body image, right? And I also want to point out that this is a myth because there are a lot of fads, a lot of workout programs and diet plans that will claim to specifically target belly fat, and that's just not possible. What you can do in terms of shaping your body is target specific strength training to aim to grow muscle in certain areas. So as an example, bodybuilders who train for aesthetics, they might specifically train their glutes and train their lats and shoulders. So because their glutes are larger and their shoulders and lats are larger, their waist is going to appear smaller to create this hourglass figure. But they're not actually able to make their waist smaller other than through overall fat loss. Abs will be partly genetically determined, but they will also just come down to usually having a fairly low level of body fat, especially for women. And sometimes the level of body fat that's required to have abs actually just isn't sustainable or healthy. So that also should not be the goal. So if you're being told that you can target belly fat, you can lose your inner thigh fat, that is not true. But here's what you can do. You can aim for healthy, sustainable fat loss, and your body will decide where it takes that fat from first. And you can work on your mindset towards it, but you can also focus on other things, not just what you look like. So this is all part of a mindset shift that is going to be a large part of the Unfiltered Athlete podcast, because I want you to start thinking about training for strength, for performance, for function, to feel your best, rather than it being dictated by the weight on the scale or what you look like in the mirror or what clothing size you are. Because I promise you will be so much happier when you shift towards being the best version of yourself. So not trying to look like someone else, not trying to look like what you think you should look like, but actually discovering what you look like when you are looking after your body. So we can't spot reduce fat, we can target overall fat loss, and we can build muscle in certain areas to shape our body. Okay, so the third myth that I want to dismantle is that a bigger calorie deficit will get you faster results. Let's say, including activity, your body needs 2,500 calories to maintain. A reasonable deficit might be 2,000 calories. So you're eating 2,000 calories, your body is burning 2,500 calories. So that would be a 500 calorie deficit. Now, you could decide I'm going to eat 1,500 calories, and that's going to be a 1,000 calorie deficit. And in theory, this larger calorie deficit means that you are going to lose fat twice as fast. You're going to lose twice as much weight in the same time, which sounds great. And, there are some specific occasions where it might work for acute, really short-term periods. Maybe you need to drop weight very quickly for a competition. But even in that scenario, I would say it's not ideal. What would have been better would have been a more sustainable, slow calorie deficit. And the reason for this is that remember that the deficit is when you are eating less energy than your body needs to maintain. So by default, you have an energy deficiency. And if you want to perform well, if you want to feel good, if you want to feel energized, if you want your appetite to be under control and your cravings, then you want to be eating enough. And our bodies can definitely manage a small calorie deficit or a moderate calorie deficit. But when we start going extreme, then your body and your brain is probably going to start fighting back. You're going to feel restricted psychologically. You're going to feel hungry. You're going to have physical hunger cues. And you are probably going to have lower energy levels. Your sleep might even be impacted. And that sleep is also going to have a knock-on impact on your ability to make solid nutrition choices, your ability to manage your cravings, even your appetite and hunger cues. If you've not had enough sleep, you're more likely to feel hungry. So all of these things kind of add up to create this vicious cycle of you really struggling to stick to that deficit. So if you're aiming for a massive deficit of 1,000 calories, but you can't stick to it and you stick to it 5 days out of the week, then you have 2 days off where you feel so restricted that you overeat, and then actually it's balanced out to a 500 calorie deficit on average per day. You may as well have just done a 500 calorie per day deficit and been consistent with it. And your energy levels would have been more consistent. You will have supported building and maintaining muscle, which is going to be important for overall having a lean physique, as well as staying strong, performing well, and supporting your metabolism. And you're just going to be able to have more flexibility in your life. Another major thing here is that faster and more extreme is not better, because if you start off, go 0 to 100, max out your calorie deficit. So you are eating as little as you possibly can manage, and you're doing as many steps as you can possibly manage. If you're already doing as much as you possibly can, what happens when your weight loss plateaus? Where do you go? You've got no wiggle room, and you're much more likely to hit that plateau sooner if you've gone all in, if you've gone too fast, too hard to start with. So what I would recommend is actually doing the minimal effective dose. What I mean by that is, what can I do that essentially is the easiest thing that I can do that still gets me the results that I want? And we don't want to go too slow, because going too slow can just mean that you're in an unnecessarily long deficit and you feel frustrated by not really getting progress that quickly. We want to find a sweet spot. We want to find a level that you have some room to move from. You could increase your steps and activity, or you could decrease your calories a little bit more, so that when you hit a plateau, which is very common in a calorie deficit, a lot of people think that their calorie deficit is just going to be one number and that's going to be forever. It's not. After a while in a calorie deficit, you're going to need to readjust. That's normal. I can do another episode about that if you want me to. Let me know. Shoot me a message on Instagram or TikTok. Send me an email. I'll link everything in the show notes. But that's normal to hit a plateau. And if you go in a way that's sustainable, you have some wiggle room, then you're going to be able to move through that plateau. You're not going to get stuck and frustrated. And when people do get stuck and frustrated, especially when they've done this huge deficit, they've been working so hard and they hit a plateau, they're much more likely to just go, oh, fuck it, this isn't for me, right? They're much more likely to get fed up and quit, and not just quit the calorie deficit, but swing so far the other way that all the weight piles back on, they feel worse, their metabolism is on the floor, so they're in a position where they've lost confidence in their ability to actually be able to lose fat and keep it off. So anytime that they maybe try to lose weight again, they're going to have a harder time of it. So for that reason, I really, really recommend a sustainable deficit, making small tweaks and leaving some wiggle room. And if you're really not sure where to start with that, one of the ways that I help people do that is through the Athlete Nutrition Blueprint. And the first step of that is actually doing something called setting your blueprint baseline, which is where you will track your food for 2 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer. And based on your intake and your activity levels and your weight through that period, I will calculate your calorie intake needs for you. And from there, you'll learn to adjust. There's so much more that I could go into. If you want to check that out, it's linked in those show notes. But the main takeaway from this myth about a bigger deficit getting you better results is that a bigger deficit is more likely to burn you out. It's more likely to be unsustainable, and you're more likely to feel worse, lose muscle, have worse energy, not be able to perform. So a smaller, more sustainable deficit that gives you room to adjust as you go is going to ultimately give you better results and results that you can keep. Okay, so myth number 4, and we are going on to a more training and exercise related one, and that is fasted cardio is best for fat loss. And I really don't like this one, this myth, because there's a level of logic behind it that fasted cardio lovers will always argue, and they will die on this hill. I'll preface this by saying I'm not saying that you should or can never do fasted cardio, but I will say it is not optimal or ideal for most people, and it's not necessary. So if you are doing it because you've been told it's what you have to do, but you actually hate it, you really don't need to do it. So to start with, I will talk about the theory of why fasted cardio is said to be good for fat loss, and then I will talk about why actually it's not the best option. So when you exercise, your body uses fuel, and its main preferred fuel source is carbohydrates. If you exercise at a lower intensity and if you don't have any carbohydrates for your body to use, it will turn to your fat stores. So you will be burning fat for energy, which obviously sounds great for fat loss. And this is what happens when you do fasted cardio. It's usually low intensity, your carbohydrate levels are depleted, and your body is going to primarily rely on fat. It's going to convert that fat and use it for energy, and you'll be burning fat during that session. So burning fat loss, right? Not exactly, because fat loss and specifically overall weight loss comes from an overall calorie deficit. So if you are doing fasted cardio, you might be burning fat at the time, but actually what you do for all of the rest of your time is what is going to dictate whether you overall are losing fat or staying the same. So if you do fasted cardio and your body's burning fat during that, but then you go about the rest of your day as normal and you're sitting down all day and you're maybe even in a calorie surplus, well, the food that you eat, your body can just reverse that process and store it as fat. So yes, fasted cardio, if you are in a calorie deficit, can support fat loss, but it's not the only way. But if you just do regular cardio and regular training, and if you're in a calorie deficit, your body will be able to use fat for fuel. And actually what I recommend, and this is for your energy levels, your hormone health, for reducing the overall stress on your body, and if you actually want to perform well, if you want to be fit, if you want to get stronger, if you want to get healthier, is fueling your sessions with carbohydrates, because that's what your body wants when you're training. And when you do that, you can push harder in training. So you might be burning more calories in that cardio session, which ultimately is going to contribute more to that overall calorie deficit. You might not be burning fat during your training session, but if you are in an overall calorie deficit, then all those hours outside of your training sessions, your body is still using energy because it uses energy at rest. What is your body taking that energy from? Well, it can take it from fat stores, which is going to help you lose fat. So you don't actively need to be doing cardio to be in the fat burning zone. If you love fasted cardio, if it makes you feel amazing and it sets you up for the day, okay, I'd still suggest you try unfasted cardio because you might feel even better. But if you are doing it because you think that it is the key to fat loss and it is the only way forwards, it is not. You don't need to do it. Also, if you are using it as a tool to be able to kind of eat whatever you want and think, well, if I'm doing my fasted cardio, then I'm burning fat and I can get away with more for the rest of the day. That is also not helpful because some people will use this fasted cardio as a compensation for not really focusing on eating well and nailing proper nutrition. And you've probably heard the expression before. It might sound cheesy, but you cannot out-train a bad diet. So if you're going into your training session fasted, you're not going to be able to push as hard because your body doesn't have its preferred fuel source. However, what about if you went into that training session fueled? You had carbohydrates, you ate after your training session, you had some protein, some carbs, maybe some fats then. You still burn those calories in that training session. And provided your energy balance is what it needs to be, say a calorie deficit throughout the day, then that is still going to result in fat loss. Your body might not be actively using fat for fuel during your workout session, but actually you're going to perform better and you're going to feel better if you're using your body's preferred fuel source. And then you can allow your body to use fat for fuel at other times of the day. So when I'm sitting here right now, my body is using energy for breathing, it's using energy for talking, for sitting upright, for digesting, even for thinking. So my body can be in the quote fat burning zone right now if I'm in an overall calorie deficit. So to recap that one, you do not need to do fasted cardio to optimize fat loss. If you love it, if you swear by it, I'm not going to stop you. But if you're doing it because you think you should be doing it, then what you need to start doing instead is focusing on fueling your training properly. So you're going into training with the right fuel source and you're recovering properly after. That is going to help you push harder, whether it's cardio or strength training, whether it's endurance, whether it's hybrid training like CrossFit. You're going to make better progress, and by eating properly after as well, it's going to help you recover. And this brings me very nicely onto myth number 5, which is that you cannot lose fat and build muscle at the same time. And yes, this is a myth. It is called body recomposition, and some people will say that it can't be done and that you need to do separate phases of muscle building in a calorie surplus followed by fat loss in a calorie deficit, but this is not true. There are certain situations where it may be more effective to build muscle and lose fat in 2 separate phases, but actually I truly think that more people would benefit from body recomposition where your scale weight is staying pretty static, but your body composition is changing. So your body fat is decreasing and your muscle mass is increasing. And this doesn't just happen by accident. Just eating anything at maintenance and not really exercising is not going to result in body recomposition, or at least not going to result in positive body recomposition. You could start losing muscle and replacing more of that muscle with a higher body fat percentage. So it doesn't happen by accident, but it absolutely can happen. And the reason this is so beneficial is, well, there's so many reasons. One of them is that it actually allows you, especially if you've spent a lot of time dieting, if you've spent a lot of time trying to lose weight, but always kind of rebounding and being in this sort of yo-yo dieting cycle, it allows you to break free of that and actually just learn sustainable habits that support your health, that support your training, and that support your body in terms of energy levels and appetite regulation and even hormone regulation. That is one of the reasons that I really strongly recommend it, especially if you've been a chronic dieter. Another reason is that if performance is your goal and you can achieve a more favorable body composition by eating at maintenance rather than in an energy deficit where you don't have as much energy for training and recovery, then why be in a deficit when you could be eating more, fueling more, you've got more energy for your training sessions, you can push harder, and your body has more energy to recover faster. Your performance is going to increase more quickly. And so there are specific conditions that are required for this to work. As I said, you can't just be eating anything and not training. One of those things is eating at maintenance. So you're not eating an amount that causes you to lose weight. You're not eating an amount that causes you to gain weight. You're looking to steadily maintain your weight. And that is going to mean that you're not in a calorie deficit or surplus. By definition, you're at maintenance. The next one is that you want to be strength training. And I'm not just talking about any old strength training, although some sort of strength training is typically better than none. But the most effective thing is progressive and structured training. So you want to be following a program that builds week on week, that pushes you to do more reps or more sets or add weight. And this is called progressive overload. And the reason this is so important is that for muscles to grow, they need a stimulus. They need a trigger that tells them they need to adapt and grow. And so if you're constantly just doing the same thing and you're not progressing it, initially you might see some results because it's a change from doing nothing. And then your body's like, well, I can do this now. I don't need to adapt or change, and my muscles don't need to grow. So if you want to continuously improve and build muscle, you need to keep giving your body an indicator that it needs to adapt. So that is progressive overload, and specifically progressive overload with strength training. Now, some other things that are required, and maybe to a lesser or greater degree, but you are going to optimize body recomposition this way. You need your recovery to be on point. You need to be taking enough rest between sessions. You need to be getting enough sleep, and you need to be managing your stress, because high stress levels do not support good recovery. We are trying to maximize muscle growth, even though we're at maintenance, not at a surplus. And to do this, we want to give our muscles the best opportunity to grow. They're not actually growing during your training session, they're growing and building during your recovery. So on that note, that recovery also requires proper nutrition. So the most obvious element of that is protein, and a good ballpark estimate is to be eating about a gram of protein per pound of body weight. But if you are way off that, don't stress about that. Just gradually build it up. And the other thing is, if you are not lean at all, then you can absolutely base that number of grams off what a leaner or healthier body weight might be for you. Because if you are 50 pounds overweight, then you don't need to eat an extra 50 grams of protein. That grams per pound should be based more on lean body mass. And there's also room for fluctuation. It's not an exact, and everyone's different, but it is a solid ballpark. And you certainly don't want to be eating too little protein, because that's not going to optimize muscle growth for you. And then another factor here is actually nutrient timing. And in terms of your priorities, nutrient timing isn't typically, number one on your priority list. But it is important. And the reason is that if you're pushing your body and you want it to build muscle, you want to be giving it the fuel it needs to be able to push hard in your training sessions, to facilitate that progressive overload that is going to keep stimulating that muscle growth. The other side of that is your post-workout nutrition. If you want to recover properly, but you're leaving it several hours before you eat, or you're eating the wrong things after training, then that is not going to be most conducive to muscle growth. So that is one of the reasons that nutrient timing is really important for body recomposition. And if nutrient timing and meal timing is something that you would like me to go into more detail about, do some episodes on, please do let me know. It's a topic that I find so important. Whatever nutrition goals you have, that there's a whole module on it within the Athlete Nutrition Blueprint. So yeah, let me know what you would like to know about nutrient timing. And just as a final note on this myth about not being able to lose fat and build muscle at the same time, some people, they will say, well, no, it can't be done. I've personally experienced it. I weighed around 80 kilos in 2014 when I started CrossFit, and I was not lean. I had been very ill that year. I hadn't been training. I'd gained a lot of fat. I was really not feeling good in my body at the time, I'll be honest. And right now, I weigh about 78 kilos, I think this morning, and I'm fluctuating between like 77, 78, but certainly I've weighed closer to 80 for the majority of this year. And I am getting visible abs at 77, 78 kilos, which if you told me that back a few years ago when I weighed 72, I'd have been like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no way I could have abs at that body weight. So over the years, my body weight really hasn't fluctuated significantly outside of, I think, maybe a maximum of 81 kilos to 72. I mean, at one point it was too low. That's a whole other episode. But it really hasn't fluctuated much outside of that. And I also haven't done specific muscle gain and cutting. Well, I've done some deficit phases. But I definitely haven't done any deliberate surplus muscle gain phases. But I will tend to get leaner at the same body weight just because I'm consistently training. I'm consistently eating well before and after my workouts. I'm consistently hitting my protein targets. And so body recomposition and muscle gain just happens. And that's what will happen if you make eating well, eating the right amount, eating the right foods, and strength training part of your routine. And then finally, and I kind of brushed on this just now when I mentioned about the time that I was way too lean, way too light. But myth number 6 is that being leaner equals being healthier and fitter. But a large part of successful fat loss and successful long-term health, performance, sustaining a body composition and a body image that you're happy with is understanding that we are all healthy at different sizes, and that even for you as an individual, there is no one single size, shape, or weight that is healthy for you. And having like a target weight, like when I was I think like in 2012, when I was a teenager, started using my fitness pal, my goal weight was 140 pounds, which is like maybe 60 odd, between like 60 and 65 kilos, I think. Which is like, I think I did like an in-body scan. They're not perfectly accurate, but I think I have 13 kilos of body fat. So I literally, that is physically impossible for me to even weigh that. So if we have these really fixed ideas about how lean we should be, how much we should weigh, and that equating to health, we can be really setting ourselves up for not only failing, but more importantly, feeling bad and even developing really unhealthy thought patterns, unhealthy behaviors, disordered eating, and even eating disorders. And of course, if you are worried about your mindset and you think you are having some disordered eating patterns, please, please, please seek medical attention. I think when we fixate on looking a certain way, being a certain weight, having a certain body fat percentage, or even just like these ideas of weighing what I weighed 10 years ago or weighing what I weighed at 18 or 21, or fitting in certain clothing size. And like sometimes these might be reasonable goals in specific scenarios, but quite often if someone comes to me with this sort of goal, I say, why? Like, why is that your specific target? Why are you fixated on that? And quite often there's not a clear reason other than they think that's what they should be aiming for. They think that they're going to feel good. They think they're going to be healthy at that size. And then I say, well, what's changed since then? Like, what has your body been through? How has your body changed? So if I then tried to set my goal weight as 140 pounds again, I'd have to like, I don't know, just stop training and eating completely to lose a load of muscle just to be able to get there, which I'm obviously not going to do. So it just shows that setting these arbitrary goals isn't helpful. And in addition to that, those arbitrary goals aren't always weight-based or clothing size-based. They can, of course, be things like having abs. And this is a tricky one for me because like I have had abs at various points, and I won't lie, it does feel nice to have abs. But I will also say that when I've had abs and then looked back at my abs, I've always been like, I did not feel like my abs were that good at the time. So I think no matter where you are, if you're not in the right headspace, you can rarely actually appreciate where your body is right now. And then you can be 6 months down the line and be like, oh, I looked amazing back then. And so that's mindset. That is not about the physical reality of you needing to look different or you needing to change your body. And there is not one single body composition that is healthy for you and that's best. I mentioned I was, I think, 69 kilos at one point in 2022, and I was pretty shredded. I certainly didn't feel as shredded as I now know that I was, but my period was delayed, and later that year I was just getting ill constantly. My body was not in a good position, and that was kind of the start of me leaving CrossFit and moving to weightlifting. Again, story for another day. But just because your body or someone else's body looks a certain way, that you associate that with health and you associate that with being fit and athletic, and you think, oh, well, I'm going to perform best when I look like that or when I weigh that. That is not necessarily the case, and it's very often not the case. The focus should be on what can you do to look, feel, and perform your best as a whole. When I say feel, I mean your energy levels, your appetite, and not just how you feel in training, but how you feel going throughout your life. I don't want you to have loads of energy in training, be able to train really hard, and then spend the rest of the time on the sofa or not being able to socialize or have a normal life because you put everything into the gym. There's a balance to be had, and you are a whole human. So what balance actually is best for you, not what's best for someone else, because maybe for someone else they can stay leaner and that works for them and that's healthy for their body, and maybe it's not and you just think it is because they're showing a highlight reel. I mean, I feel like again, this could be a whole separate episode, but the key message being, I think, is that we want to be focusing on the process and the habits that result in us becoming the best, healthiest versions of ourselves. And the healthiest version of yourself is probably going to be the one that performs the best, because even if you get really shredded for a short period of time, if your body fights back like mine did, you're not going to perform well long term. And actually, performance requires you to be able to stay in the game long enough to make consistent, solid progress towards whatever goals you have. Performance and health do go hand in hand. You don't need to and you shouldn't be sacrificing your health for your performance, and that goes for your physical and mental health. So we went a bit deeper than fat loss on that last one, but this is the Unfiltered Athlete after all. I promise to be unfiltered and yap, and it'll probably get more unhinged and unfiltered as we go on. But let's recap what we've learned in this episode really quickly. Number one, you don't need to eat clean or cut out foods to lose fat. You need a plan that allows you to be consistent and build a level of flexibility that you can actually maintain long term. Myth number two was that you can't spot reduce fat. You can't decide where you lose fat from. Your genetics are going to determine where you store fat, and you can shape your body to an extent with strength training. And if you're patient, fat will eventually shift from more stubborn areas. But the best thing to do is focus on your habits, your health, your strength, and your function, and allow your body to become the best version of itself, whatever that looks like, when you are looking after it. And then the third thing we've learned is that a bigger calorie deficit may not result in faster weight loss, especially long term. Often cutting calories too low is just going to backfire, and what you need instead is a sustainable deficit and a plan for returning to maintenance after that deficit so you don't experience this big rebound. And then number four, we have learned that fasted cardio is not the best way to lose fat. And for some people, it is a straight up bad idea. It's going to put your body and hormones under unnecessary stress. And if you want to perform your best, you need to be fueled. And the fifth thing we've learned, I know that I've talked a lot about a calorie deficit in this episode, but it is actually possible for fat loss to occur without weight loss. And that is when you're building muscle and losing fat at the same time. The scale is staying the same, and it's called body recomposition. And most people skip this, yet it's one of the best ways to balance feeling and performing your best, building healthy habits, and also actually being able to stay flexible long term. And if you want a full episode on body recomposition, I'd love to hear from you. You can message me on Instagram, on TikTok, you can email me, and it's all going to be linked in the show notes. And then the sixth thing is that being leaner does not equate to being healthier or fitter. Your healthiest body is going to look different to mine, and your healthiest body right now is going to look different to your healthiest body in 10 years time. Bodies are dynamic, they're constantly changing, and you want to nurture that change, not try to fight it constantly. And this is such an important point that I want to drive home. And if you take nothing else from this episode, let it be this. Because, yes, I can help you with specific goals like weight loss and muscle gain and performance. And I can't wait to share all the ideas and tips and stories I have to help you do that. But ultimately, I want you to be happy and healthy along the way. And so that's going to be an underlying theme throughout the Unfiltered Athlete podcast. And on that note, on the next episode, I'm talking everything about tracking calories and macros. So if the calorie deficit stuff I spoke about today went a bit over your head, or you're just not quite sure where to start, or you've tried tracking before and you felt overwhelmed or it felt too restrictive, this episode is all about tracking without losing your mind. And to make sure you don't miss it or miss any future episodes, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening or watching. And I would also love if you could rate and leave me a review too. I'm just getting started with the show, and I have heard that rating, subscribing, reviewing, and sharing are all things that will help me get my message out to more people, to hopefully be able to help more people just like you. So on that note, also, please don't forget to share this episode with anyone that you think needs to hear it too. And if you are feeling stuck right now, whether it's with your nutrition, your training, your mindset, or all three, if your progress is slow or you've hit a plateau, or you're just not quite sure where you need to be putting your efforts to get better results, the Train assessment is for you. It is my free 2-minute quiz. It's going to score you across 5 key areas that you need to nail for results, and it gives you a free custom report as well. So it's going to detail actionable tips, steps, strategies that you can take to start seeing and feeling results. And yes, it is completely free. It's all linked in the show notes. It's called the Train assessment. And finally, if you know that nutrition is what is holding you back right now, whether you're struggling with consistency, knowing what to eat, how much to eat, and whether your priorities are performance or fat loss or muscle gain, the Athlete Nutrition Blueprint, I'm so excited. It is open now. And again, all the information you need about it is linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening or watching. I'm so happy to have you here. And until next time.